Great. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to our third Johannesburg UiPath community meetup. Today we'll be taking a look at configuration management inside of UiPath and the approach that we've taken to kind of get around some of the challenges that we face with some of the traditional methods, like using an Excel file, for example. So on the call today, we've got Andrew Haramsa as well, who will be taking us through some of the benefits and some of the thoughts that have led us to taking this approach. And as soon as he's done with that, then we'll go through the demo of how all of that is actually implemented within our environment. Christine, I'm not sure if you can see my camera.
Yes, we can see your camera.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andrew so that he can kick us off with the presentation.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I'm a little bit ill-prepared now because according to me, the meeting was only going to start in half an hour. I just want to share my screen and please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, it's
okay.
on.
So thank you for the opportunity to host us today to share with you our thoughts around configuration management. And I mean, what I just wanted to talk to you about quickly is maybe the different types of configs that we have out there. The first one, and it's almost not a method of config for us because it should be a big no-no, is hard coding your variables into your code. Not only is this dangerous from a security perspective, but also very bad practice. If you have any changes in your environment, hard coding just results in a lot of rework and delay. And as I said, security risks. Yeah, just imagine what happens if you need to change a huge URL, your SAP server changes, and you now have to go through all your stuff and change it. So hard coding, I'm not going to spend time on. Another method of doing configures is Excel, obviously. Not a bad method, and then I'll talk a little bit more about Excel a little bit later, but definitely a method that people use out there. Another method that I've seen and is also quite valid is Json Files. I mean, encoding your config into a Json file, nothing wrong with that, and can be quite useful if you understand how to use them, etc. Another method, of course, is the UiPath assets, and I will chat a little bit about it, but also a great way to store things that shouldn't be hard-coded and don't change often. Great for storing config. Then there's obviously SQL as well, or any database for that matter. It doesn't have to be SQL. And storing that in there also brings a whole bunch of advantages, which I'll chat about a little bit later. Okay. All right, so let's talk about Excel a little bit. I'm not sure if any of you have seen these errors. I mean, some of these errors I actually pulled off UiPath forums, so I know some of you might have seen it. And so Excel in general, how it's used inside of UiPath specifically and in the REFramework is having an Excel file sitting in the data folder and storing the config in there, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. Don't get me wrong. However, there's a couple of challenges around having a file that is embedded in your code. In that, every time that you want to change your config, you will need to republish the code, which is great from a release management perspective, because then every time you can test and make sure that the config change didn't break your code. So, I mean, it is there. The other limitation that you've got with Excel files is really just that it has to be then done by a programmer or the ops team or a DevOps team. It's not accessible really to the end users. And a lot of the time you find that your end users know more about the changes that are happening than you do. So how do you get around that? One of the ways would be to take that Excel file and put it in a central location and make that central location accessible to your end users. And then you start running into some of these other problems in that more than one person can have it open. A user might, or a developer, might corrupt the file, or their machine might shut down in the middle and make a mess of the file, or delete the file, or like this error, delete a specific item in the line, and then you no longer have your config items in there. So not great from that perspective. Other problem that we tend to see then also is that Excel crashes from time to time. So then you're left with Excel misbehaving. And yes, there are ways around working around it without actually having to open Excel, but some of these limitations still apply. The same really holds true for JSON files. I mean, that's even less user accessible. I mean, most users don't even know what a JSON file is, let alone having the ability to change it. If you put in central location, a lot of these same challenges come up. Okay, so what about SQL? I mean, SQL have got quite a few advantages. Obviously some disadvantages as well, but let's go through the advantages first. It's great for central storage. I mean, most of the time your SQL servers are backed up. They tend to allow, they allow multiple access from different places. So you won't have that file being opened by different people problem. It's also auditable, so you can see exactly who's done what. If you've configured your SQL correctly, you can see when it was done, etc. It is also quite secureable, so you can specify exactly who can get access to it and who can't, even on a line-by-line basis. It's quite scalable. I mean, making a SQL server high available is these days quite prevalent, and you could easily increase size, etc., etc. So quite scalable. And another great advantage of it is bulk changes that can be made. So one of the things that's probably also a little bit of a drawback on Excel is that if you have something that you've configured in these Excel files quite often, and you later decide that you need to change it, or you're forced to change it. So for instance, say you have got a intranet portal that the first portion of the URL is always the same, but you access different folders or sites or pages on that. So that differs per automation you do. And now all of a sudden your company decides to rebrand and that URL changes. So your fix then would be to go through each of those files and change it. And then that's obviously not something you want to do if your automations run anything above 50, and even below 50, it's a mission. So something like that SQL would be great for, because you would be able to go in and then just change it. Obviously, if you configure this in an asset, that would also be a good way of changing it centrally. But I mean, in SQL, you can do bulk changes. So some of the negatives: not everyone is a SQL expert, not even the developers, let alone our end users. Getting data in and out of SQL might not be that accessible. Another one is it's not very user-friendly. I mean, for those of you that don't know SQL, it's fine. You can work your way around it. For those that don't, there's often a lot of fields in there that we don't see otherwise. And not great for grouping, etc., unless you know how to do it. It's quite resource intensive, even if you know SQL. I mean, so for instance, if you were to store your config in SQL and you were adding new items the whole time or changing them, etc., it's an insert statement here, an update statement there, and it takes some time. All right. So the other drawback of SQL is that it's slightly harder to see different versions of config. And what I mean by different versions of config is, for instance, development, QA, production versions of the same config. Potentially you could still, I mean, if you knew your way around it, but not as easy. So what we propose and what we want to share with you is the potential of using a portal-based config, which is something more central and pretty much accesses SQL in the back end. So you get all the benefits of SQL, but in a much more human-friendly view. So think of a web page, your config is displayed on there, and you can edit it like any other web page that's designed. So what is also quite nice about it is the fact that you can group your processes. The limit is your skill on setting up portals on web pages. But potentially what could happen is that if you have more than one job that relates to the same process automation, you could easily group them in here. You could group per regions, you could group per folders, whatever you want. Also, it is pretty much editable by anyone that can use a browser. Because I mean, these things aren't difficult. It's got a text field or a drop-down box or whatever the case might be, and it can just be filled in. That being said, you don't necessarily want everyone to be able to edit any config. So a portal needs to be obviously secureable and potentially have the ability to secure per config item. And what I mean by that is that potentially if you want your very end users to be able to edit an email address, but nothing else of the config, you could restrict them to not even see that if they don't have the right access level. Or if you have a power user that can see a little bit more, they can change company codes or transaction items and email addresses, they can see a little bit more, and so forth and so forth. So the ability to scale your access per process. Okay, so what you could also do with a portal is the ability to validate specific fields. If you have an email address that you need to fill in, not only could you mask it and see that it is a valid email address, but you have the potential of, if it's inside your organization, to actually make sure that it's a valid email address, that it actually exists and it can be, a mail can be sent to it, or numbers or whatever the case might be. Field validation is quite easy in a portal. Right. It gives you the potential to use your same config portal for other things, or take your config portal and slot it into your automation portal if you have something like that. So what other uses, for instance, I mean, a place to store metadata around your processes. I mean, things like the descriptions, who it's used for, how much time you normally stay with it, or links to reports of the same process, or sub-configuration pages, or anything really. But I mean, one nice place where automation can live. Right. What is also quite cool, and Jackie will show you guys later, is the ability that you can see your dev, QA, and production config on one page. So it's quite easy for you then to work on your development items and make sure that they've got their values and quickly switch between them if you need to. And then when you then go to production, it is quite easy then to just flip it around to production, which is probably something that Excel and JSON and things like that probably don't handle that well. You probably have to switch the files around or do some more config, etc. But in here it's quite easy. Okay, so obviously it has all the benefits of SQL or your database because it lives on top of it. And references database the same way that you would if you were in a SQL database, just obviously more secure and without needing the know-how for each person that uses it. Okay, so what do you need to start to try and build something like that? First off, you need a method to identify your process. And I mentioned here a GUID or a graphical user identifier. That can be kind of your magic thread that pulls everything together, because out of the studio or out of your platform, because just keep in mind, this doesn't just have to work in UiPath. You can do this actually on any platform that you use. And apologies, UiPath, but so that GUID can also then be pulled towards things like telemetry. If you have telemetry that and you want to tie it into the same process, you can say use that same GUID. If you wanted to look at your metadata, again, that could be pulled towards this, etc., etc. The possibilities are literally endless. I mean, I can talk probably an hour about just the possibilities around doing that. So the GUID is quite important, and you need to have an ability to get that GUID into your code, and have it stay there. Okay. So secondly, you need to have a way to differentiate between your different versions of config. So from Studio, again, you need to be able to say, listen, I want to access my dev code or my QA code or my prod code. And that can be something as easy as just sending a single letter to your database query, or writing an activity that has it or something in that line. You could also potentially have ways of building it into your pipeline or your peer reviews where it automatically switches between dev and production. I mean, we've built that into our pipeline, for instance, that it can automatically switch the value to production if needed. Okay, something else that you need, and this is potentially optional if you didn't want to do access control, but you need to understand how you want your access control to work. Who do you want to have access to what? How many levels of security do you want? And how are you going to assign it? Well, who should see what? Should they see everything and just not be able to change it, or just see what they can change? So you need to understand that kind of before you start setting this up. Something else you need to decide is whether you want validation, and then you obviously need to decide which items you want validation on and how you're actually going to be doing that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing it in initially without validation and then later building your validation on depending on the type of line item that you specify. Okay. So, and then obviously you need a portal. And this can be anything. This can be a K2 workflow portal. This could be a UiPath applications portal. It can be something built in ASP.NET. Even a SharePoint form if you could get that going. So anything that has the ability to push and pull from your database and something that allows you to do user access control. So I mean, the possibilities there is endless as well. Okay, so how does that actually work? I mean, I have touched on some of it, but Studio needs to be able to talk to the database using the unique identifier that we spoke about in order to get those values out. Now, I would seriously suggest just writing a little library or activity to actually get that config out. And that same little library could potentially add the process to SQL if it's not there and create your grid. Jackie will talk a little bit later about how we've done that. And this isn't difficult code either. In fact, it actually exists already to an extent. I mean, if you know the framework, REFramework, you'll see there's a initialization XAML in there, and in there it actually adds an Excel sheet to a dictionary. And this is really all you want to do. You want to take a data table and play it into your configs items, and you do that by converting it into a dictionary. And then when we did it initially, I literally took that initialization XAML and just adapted it a little bit so it could read from SQL and create the same thing. So really what you end up with is a key value pair, name and value, and that then becomes your dictionary. And the rest works exactly the same way than it currently does in the UiPath REFramework. But I mean, potentially you could do this in anything that allows you to use dictionaries. Okay, so that is pretty much the theory behind it. Just before I hand over to Jackie, does anybody have any questions for me particularly? No. I just want to check with you, Jackie. Do you want to show the video on your side or as part of the presentation?
Does it run on your side, Andrew?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so would you mind maybe kicking it off on your side? But before you do, thank you so much for taking us through this, Andrew. I think just to kind of bring together what Andrew said as well, one of the biggest challenges we had when we were looking at how to manage configuration between multiple different developers working on the same project was, the challenge of having Excel open, and, some developers might have it open while you're trying to work on it, and it caused a lot of frustration for us. So, when we started out with the journey through creating the portal and the SQL database, the first stepping stone that we took was figuring out how the configuration would work. And when we saw that, you could use a GUID to kind of identify your process and record all the information about the process that you need to in SQL, it becomes a lot easier to add a whole bunch of, different pieces to that. So like Andrew said, then you can start adding reports, you can start adding your metadata and anything else that you want to associate to your process, even if you were to go to, the level of telemetry, which we can cover in another session as well. So to see how that's all come together and how we've changed it over time, that's been quite cool to see. And I mean, like Andrew said as well, SQL works really well. It's worked for us, but we started this for the data services offering was formalized inside of UiPath. So if you did want to build this out inside of data services because you might not have access to a SQL server, that would also work. You'd actually have better access to the data services because it pulls through as entities into your UiPath Studio. So it is something to maybe look at if you needed an alternative to SQL, but still like the way that it would work. And then you could manage that all as well. Okay, Andrew, would you mind maybe walking through the video with the audio, please? Or at least just click and play. Let's just see if it. Okay, so the audio is not coming through on the video. So we have pre-recorded the demo just to make sure that nothing goes haywire and that we did show everything that we wanted to show.
Unfortunately, the audio is not coming through, Jackie. It's very, very, very soft. I can barely hear it. So
okay.
Would you mind talking through it?
Sure. That would be fine. Yes.
Go back. Sorry. Apologies.
Okay, so what we're looking at over here is our configuration management portal that Andrew was talking about. And in essence, what I'm showing on the screen is that this process does not yet exist within the portal. But when we create the UiPath process, it will pop up. So this portal, as you can see up at the top, is where we manage our projects, the processes, any metadata associated to it, as well as the config items. So Andrew, I think we can continue from there. Would it be easier for you to if I shared it from my side?
Yes, I think so. There you can control the pause,
Okay.
etc. And apologies, I'm presenting from
Perfect.
Teams here.
Okay, let me just quickly get this up this side. Okay, let's try this now. Configuration management portal. I'm not sure if the sound is coming through. Let's start by taking a look at our configuration management portal.
It is so soft, we can barely hear it. Sorry, Jackie.
Jackie,
Okay.
yes.
No, it's all good. Let me just mute that and then we can skip through the video. Okay, but you can still hear me all right though, right?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so what we've done is inside of UiPath, we've created the project. I'm just trying to get my screen all lined up. There we go. Okay, so what happens is once we've created the project, we generally start by importing a library that we created. All that this library does is it gets all of our configuration items from SQL. So I'll walk you through exactly what that looks like as well. So this library is hosted on our orchestrator, which is what we're busy installing now. Once that has been installed, we can pull through the get config from SQL activity and pop that into the main sequence. Then what we do is we take a look at the input and output arguments. So we've got two input arguments that come through. The first one that we're looking to send through is the environment, the current directory. So that's essentially the directory of the project that we've just created or that we're working on. And the reason for this is because we need to actually see if the GUI.json file exists. So we need to know where to look for that GUI.json file before we actually, pull information from it and know that we're creating it in the right place. Then, as you'll see on the screen, I've just changed the D to a P, the P to a D. That is the environment that we're supposed to toggle between. So if you send through P, then it pulls through all of our production configuration items. And if you send through D, it pulls through all of the development configuration items. Then what we've done as well is we've assigned the output dictionary, which is config output or config out, to config, which is a blank variable at this point. It won't be blank once this has been run. So what I did next was I dug a little bit deeper into what this method actually does, or what this library does. The library that we'd imported and pulled from or installed from our orchestrator. What I've done here is pretty much just taken you through, or what I'm going to do is take you through how that works. So we pull our database connection from the orchestrator, which we store as an asset. We create a new dictionary, which is pretty much blank. We pull through another library, which we've written called getProcessID, and I'll explain that in a bit as well. Then what we do is we check to see if we're working with the dev or the prod environments, and that will change the database name that we'd be looking at for the configuration items. So that's how we kind of split out our dev and prod. We look at two different databases. Okay, then what we do is once we've identified what the database name should be, we go down into the try catch. And we actually try, let me just see if I can fast forward a little bit. We try to select all the config items from our database where the process ID is equal to the GUID.json, or the string that the GUID or the unique identifier that's stored in that GUID.json file. Now that GUID.json file, as you can see, that's why it's quite important. And we use that library that I've mentioned further up to actually get that process ID that we send through here. So if we continue on, once we've got those configuration items, all that we do is we append those to the dictionary that we previously created, which was blank, and we send that dictionary out as an out argument. Now, if we specifically look at the getProcessID activity that I'd referenced, we can take a deeper look into what that activity does. Now, in essence, what we hope to achieve with this activity is pull the project name or the process name from the project.json file. Every UiPath project that you create will have a project.json file, and in there you'll see the process name. Now, what we do is we extract that process name and we look to see in our SQL database if we have a process that is listed or that has that name associated to it, to see if the GUID exists in the database. That generally happens if we can't find a GUID.json file. If we do find a record in SQL for that process or that GUID, we just update the process name. So this way we're also keeping our process in sync with the database. So if anything changes with regards to the process name, that updates in our database as well, which is actually quite important for us because we link that through to quite a few of our different data entities. So like I'd mentioned, we group our processes by project. So being able to see the live name change or the proper name change, that is quite important for us. Okay, so like I'd mentioned, if the GUID or the record is found in SQL, we update the process name. If it is not found, we create the GUID.json file with that GUID inside. We create the process inside of SQL as a record in the process table. We create the default configuration items in the dev and the prod database. So we've got a table for process, and we've got a table for our dev config and a table for our prod config, which are all linked using the process GUID. Once we've created the default configuration items, which in this case is pretty much just the error recipients of whoever needs to be notified when this process fails, we've got an ops team which we've added into the CC list, and that's how we manage the default items. Then lastly, what we want to do as well, like Andrew mentioned, we've got user access control on our portal so that developers can have access to the config items, and we can kind of change that as we need to. What we do by default is we also assign the whoopsie daisy. We'll also assign the access inside of that library. Just want to get back to where we were. Perfect. Okay. And then what happens is at the end of the process, we return that process ID, which is then also stored in the GUID.json file. Okay. I keep clicking in the wrong places. My apologies. Let's just check if that takes us back to the right place. There we go. Okay. All right, so that is pretty much the logic that is encapsulated inside of that library, this library over here. So if we go back to the main project or process that we created after we, well, this is pretty much the process that we've just started developing. So in an ideal world, if you've just created a new solution, you'd manage your packages, install the read config from SQL library that we created, and we'd pull in that get config from SQL activity. Now what happens is we can actually iterate through the items that we pull back from config. So if you chuck a for each loop inside of the main sequence, and you iterate through that config that comes out from the get config from SQL activity, we can actually just write all of those items to our output pane. So in essence, what would happen now is if we look at the project file or the files that exist inside of the process folder, you can see that there's no GUI.json file over there, but there is a project.json file. So as I've mentioned, this is created with each and every single UiPath process. The GUI.json is not. That is something that we built in. So now what happens is if we go back to the solution and we run this, based on the libraries that we're calling and all the pre-work that we've done, that GUI.json file will be created and the default configuration items will be added to the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause here quick so we can see that the GUI.json file was not found, which is what we were expecting. In a case where this process is being executed and has been executed and it's not the first time we're working with it, it would actually find the GUI.json file and it wouldn't go create anything extra inside of the databases. It would just read what's already there. Okay, so what then happens is because the GUI.json file didn't exist, it created it and added the process ID in there. So the process ID was returned. We can see what that is, and the configuration was then read from the dictionary. Here at the bottom, we can see this is the configuration item. This is the default configuration item that I was referring to, which has now been successfully written to the output pane. So what we do next is we actually move over to the portal. Okay, let me just stop here quick because that is quite important. So as you can see now, since we've executed the process, we've got that GUI.json file that now exists. And if we open up that GUI.json file, you'll see that the GUI that is in there matches the one that was returned inside of the UiPath Studio. That is then the process ID that is associated to the config items within our database. So if we go over to the portal, which looks like this, and we hit search again, you can see that that item is now popped through. These are all the default values that we send through to the database. The submitter is dependent on whoever's logged onto the box that this was created, that the process was created on. And what we do next is if we click on this icon over here, which is essentially details, it takes you to the config page, which is what we're looking at here. Now, the beauty of this, and this is what Andrew was saying as well, is you can actually manage your configuration items for the different environments. So if you have 3 environments or 4 different environments, not necessarily just prod and dev, let's say you have QA and test as well, you can add those in there. You just need different database tables as well. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate here is because we sent in the D parameter for dev, it means that we're going to be pulling out the dev config. So if we hit on this plus icon over here next to dev config details, which I appear to do now, there we go. We can add the name, the value, and the description. Now that is essentially what you would need if you were creating an asset inside of the orchestrator as well. You'd need a name, a value, and a description. So we kept to a very similar model there. Once we've now created that, we can see that it pulls through. Let me just go back a little bit because I think I went too quickly there. There we go. So as you can see, the value is test value, the name is test, and the description is pulled through as we've created it. Now, what we're expecting to see when we run this UiPath process again is that the configuration item is actually pulled through. So I'll pop up that pane now again. There we go. So there we can see that the second configuration item did actually pull through correctly. Now, if you wanted to, what we did as well as part of our portal is we added a replicate to production function for code reviewers once they've reviewed the code to actually go, apply that to prod as well. So we could just override the prod config. That was just a nice piece of functionality that we added. So let me just go back to that so that I can show you exactly what I mean. There we go. So we've added a replicator dev and a replicator prod variable. So in a case where we had multiple different variables here, let's say we had 10 or 15 different config items that we wanted to replicate to prod, we'd replicate those items over and change the values as necessary. So you don't have to go recreate every single one individually. So that's more or less how we've done it. This has worked really well for us. We've gone through quite a few different iterations of enhancements and improving the process as we could. That's where we're standing at the moment. So I'm not sure if there are any questions. Can everybody still hear me okay?
Let me make sure that everyone can unmute. I think anyone who would like to unmute themselves and ask questions should be able to unmute now. If not, please write to me in the chat, in the public chat, and just tell me whether you cannot unmute for questions or for any other comments you might have. I think we can go on, and perhaps if anyone has questions, they can leave them in the chat. So I see there are no questions this time.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Christina. Andrew, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you'd like to add from what they've seen and what we showed them. Okay, maybe what we can do is maybe go around the room and find out if there's, oh, okay. Let's see if we can change that.
Let me work on that. It's weird. And you can you unmute now?
Okay, thanks. So no, nothing more that I wanted to add. Just this is kind of a starting point for a whole bunch of different things that you could do. And we really believe this is quite scalable, and you have the ability to add it quite quickly and without much further work if you have something like this going. So yeah, I mean, nobody has to do it this way. Although that being said, I mean, we probably would love to work with UiPath to see whether something like this couldn't be co-designed into Orchestrator. Yeah, I mean, this is working really well for us. We just thought to be clear.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And I mean, the nice thing about this as well is, you know, if you were to pull this into, you know, a database, or if you were to pull this into data services, you know, the reporting that you can do with this is quite useful as well. So, you know, there's a lot of flexibility that you can gain from an approach like this. And yeah, I don't know if there's anybody who may have thought of doing something like this in a different way, or has done something like this in a different way. I think we'd definitely like to hear from you. Don't know if there's anybody who would like to inform us of different ways that they may have achieved something like this. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's many people who are on the take to tell us more about what they've done. I think it's going to be quite interesting to see, you know, how we can develop this in the future as well. Is there anybody who could potentially think of a way, or could potentially tell us how they implement, you know, or maybe solutions that they implement with specific regard to mapping something to a specific process, or getting a list of their processes and kind of using that information to enrich their ecosystem? Is there anybody who's tried to do something like that? Thanks, Ramon. Christina, I'm not sure if you saw the comments. It seems like people are still battling to unmute.
Wait, just a minute, Roman.
Okay.
It's weird. Okay, Roman, are you able to
Hi,
unmute?
yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Now it worked. So
Perfect.
yeah, I tried to keep quiet and just listen because I'm actually a stranger to your community. I'm tuning in from Switzerland, but it's been very interesting. Just wanted to say hi and also giving you a comment because you've been talking and asking for questions and whatnot. So but where I see this, or where we use the config always, of course we use the REFramework. We've mostly worked with the Excel files that is included in the data folder, but where we had to kind of tweak the REFramework was usually when you do some debugging and or developing, you want to test something in isolation, 1 or 2 activities, and then maybe copy paste them over to your production process. And now this is always a bit tricky, and you do some hard coding in your test, isolated test, and then you copy it over, and then you fill in the config parameters. This is also, just annoying to do. So we have a separate activity tester, a workflow embedded, which already has the local config file connected. So at least you can keep the same references and copy some activities over to your production process. So at least that. But I see what you showed with your methods and separate package that you include. The same would apply there, I assume. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ramon, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us and for checking in. We very much appreciate that. It's interesting what you've said about the REFramework, because that was actually where we faced the most challenges with the config file, but it could have been also, well, it was because, we had multiple developers working on the same config file. So have you ever run into challenges like that you've had to try and get around? Ramon? Okay, let me see if I can unmute you.
For sure, you can unmute yourselves now. So it's just
Thank
please
you.
try.
Okay, now
There
it worked again. Yeah, somehow it was blocked again. Thanks. In very few occasions did we have to work on the same config file. So that was interesting for me to hear when you said, multiple developers have to access the same file. We've not had this very often, or could arrange that, but yeah, or I don't know how large those processes and implementations are, where you get multiple people accessing the same file. But yeah, we've not really run into trouble there.
Okay, which is actually quite a good thing. I think a lot of the kind of pieces of innovation that occur, in our industry is because somebody somewhere got stuck.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
sorry.
just and one more remark, really. Yeah, with the differences between dev and prod, I think this is very important. You're in different environments, you have different paths where some of your, be it test cases or whatever, are stored. So it's good to have an easy way to, but also compare the two values and environments at a glance. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Something that we've run into, something that I've run into, last week was I had been working on a process or developing on a process, enhancing a process that had been in production. So, having to separate that code out and not affect what was happening there, I think that was one of the big benefits where I saw, being able to use the configuration separately made a huge difference. Because back to the point of, we had the issue of multiple developers accessing the same config file. We managed to move the config file, somewhere that's basically to a shared drive where we could access it, from either the production processes that we're running, or as developers, where you'd make a copy, put that on your local, and check what was happening there and compare the values. And that was one of the issues that we ran into, where if your config file is living somewhere centrally that your prod system could essentially work off of, when you make those development changes and you're making huge feature changes, that does pose a threat to your solution. So in that regard, I don't know if that's something that anybody else has faced as well. But that's kind of the thinking that really pushed us quite hard into trying something like this. I'm not sure if there's anybody else who maybe wants to unmute and ask questions they may have had, or if you want to drop them into the chat.
I mean, just maybe one thing that I can add on here is the moment that you're starting getting comfortable with getting your solutions to work with SQL more regularly, you can expand it for other users. And remember, I said something about subconfig, which means that you could potentially run multiple processes of the same config that just uses different config depending on what the transaction code or the country code or something like that is. And that it pushes even further in that I don't know who's used REFramework off an Excel sheet, so they're not using REFramework against the queues per se in Orchestrator, but needing to do the same process multiple times over, and doing it out of SQL almost makes it easier because you can update the fields and somebody can see it, etc. So instead of using Excel there, we've also opted to start using SQL for that, and we still see that as config, just like subconfig potentially. So I mean, it can really span out, and again, you can have dev and production values in there. So if you wanted to run the same set of things in a REFramework, you could pull it out of SQL and do the same type of thing. I just want to ask a question to the general audience. Is there anybody in here that have the need to have their end users change config? Okay, we seem to be unique in that same thing.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Changing config, I think rarely did the end customer, for us at least, have to change anything, or they routed it via us. But then again, yeah, as you mentioned in the beginning, if you do it with a regular config, yeah, you have to republish the whole process, which is, yeah, not very good always. I also have one question to you regarding maybe security. Let's say you have two customers. How do you handle it, and how do you handle the access of or making sure that, yeah, they cannot access any assets or config values from maybe a different customer?
So, I mean, Jack would probably be better to answer that, but what we do is we have a separate database that handles all of our enrolled users. Each of those users then get per line item access to specific line item configs. So if they're not allocated to that set of config, they're not going to see it. But we can actually do it per line, not just per process. So yeah, we could block them out from a whole project. They can't see this project, or if they can see the project, they can only see 3 out of the 4 processes that contribute to it. And out of that, they can only see the email address field. They can't see the retry values or the transaction codes or something like that. So it's very, very granular, but it still uses Active Directory for us because all of our clients are internal. But I mean, you could use a separate user database if you needed to. So something like K2 has built-in users that you could also use. But yes, I mean, it's down to line level.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Roman, Jackie was out because her Zoom crashed for a bit. So if you want her to also share some insights, could you please repeat the question because she was out.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, Andrew pretty much answered it for me. I was just asking for how you handle maybe security, and so my example was having two different customers that access their config or where you store those values, but just to make sure that one customer or entity cannot access the lines, config lines from the other. But it's clear to me, and
Okay.
Andrew answered it. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, just to kind of, I caught the bit where Andrew was explaining the different user accounts that are allowed. What you could also do, so our solution was written using .NET Core, and something that is really nice that Microsoft have released is the identity server. So that allows for back-to-back integration, the B2C, the B2B, all the different types of integrations that you get into different AD groups. You can bring that in as well and use that to apply role-based access or user-based access to your config items. So that's just on top of what Andrew was explaining. Awesome. I don't know if there are any other questions or comments that anybody would like to make.
Nobody wants to ask any questions? Any further questions for Jackie or Andrew?